one night with two Apache sisters, and the rancher was forever marked by their secret. Ethan Harper had lived all his life on the Harper Ranch, a sprawling stretch of land that rolled across the Arizona desert. The ranch was his world, and every inch of it was familiar to him. The way the wind rustled the dry grass, the patterns the sun painted across the red rocks in the evening, and the soft lowing of the cattle as they grazed under the wide-open sky. Life had always been simple for him, shaped by routine and hard work. But that simplicity gave him a sense of peace he could never find anywhere else. He loved the quiet of the desert and the rhythm of a day spent tending to the land. He knew the signs of weather and the tracks of every animal that roamed his property. His connection to the land was deep, almost instinctive. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in streaks of gold and crimson, Ethan walked along the fence line checking the cattle. The evening air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush. He had just finished making sure the herd was calm when he noticed something unusual. Near the edge of the pasture, the ground seemed disturbed. Footprints marked the soft dirt, delicate and small, unlike anything he had seen before. He frowned. There were no signs of animals large enough to make such tracks, and certainly no humans were supposed to be roaming here this late. Ethan crouched to examine them more closely. The footprints were small, barefoot, and perfectly formed, showing a rhythm, as though two people had walked side by side. His brow furrowed. The nearest neighbors were miles away, and strangers rarely wandered so deep into the desert. Yet the tracks were fresh. Something, or someone, had been here not long ago. He stood up, his hand instinctively resting on the handle of the knife at his belt. There was a strange stillness in the desert that evening, as if it held its breath. As he followed the trail toward the barn, the wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of smoke and something floral he couldn't quite identify. The tracks led closer, and suddenly he saw movement in the corner of his vision. Two figures emerged from the shadows, stepping into the soft silver glow of the rising moon. They were young women, striking and calm, yet unlike anyone he had ever seen. Their hair was dark and thick, braided in intricate patterns, and their eyes carried a quiet intensity. They moved with grace, unafraid, almost as if they belonged to the desert itself. Ethan froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. His instincts told him to be cautious, yet there was something different about them. They did not seem threatening. There was a serenity in the way they stood, a quiet confidence that made the hairs on the back of his neck rise. The sisters, as he would later come to know them, had a presence that was both comforting and unsettling. He noticed the small details, the way their feet barely touched the ground, the soft strength in their posture, and the way the moonlight seemed to outline them like they belonged to another world. The younger of the two, who had a faint scar near her temple, spoke first, her voice soft yet steady. "We don't mean harm," she said. Ethan's surprise made him step back slightly, but the calm in her tone made him lower his guard. "We are just passing through," she added. He noticed the sincerity in her eyes, the way they held his gaze without fear. The sisters didn't explain why they were there, nor did they reveal much about themselves. Instead, they seemed to communicate with the land and the animals. Ethan watched in astonishment as the cattle, which had been restless moments before, suddenly quieted and turned toward them. The sisters walked slowly among the herd, their hands brushing against the animals, and the movement seemed to calm the entire pasture. It was a strange, almost magical sight, yet Ethan couldn't deny the effect they had. Curiosity overtook caution. Ethan stepped closer. "Who are you?" he asked. The sisters exchanged a glance but did not answer directly. Instead, they smiled faintly, a gesture full of understanding yet secrecy. They seemed to speak without words, sharing a connection that Ethan couldn't quite grasp. He felt an unexpected pull, as though meeting them had awakened something deep inside him. The night stretched on, and the desert grew quieter. Ethan led the sisters to the small cabin near the barn, offering them warmth and shelter. They accepted without hesitation, but even as they settled near the fire, their aura remained mysterious. They did not ask for food or drink, yet they were at ease, as though the desert itself had given them permission to be there. Ethan watched them carefully. Their presence was unlike anything he had ever experienced. There was a depth in their eyes that hinted at histories and stories untold. As the night deepened, Ethan tried to speak with them, hoping to understand who they were and why they had come. But the sisters spoke sparingly, sharing only what they chose. Through small gestures and glances, Ethan began to piece together fragments of their lives. They were deeply connected to the land, and their knowledge of the desert was extraordinary. They understood the movements of animals, the signs of weather, and the subtle changes in the air that even Ethan, experienced as he was, could not always read. By the first light of dawn, Ethan realized that this encounter would mark him forever. He had met people unlike anyone he had ever known. Strangers who had entered his world and left an impression that could not be erased. Their secretive nature, combined with their deep connection to the land, had changed the way he saw his ranch and everything around him. It was as if the desert had revealed a hidden layer of itself through them, a layer that he could sense but not fully understand. When the sisters left as silently as they had arrived, Ethan felt a strange emptiness, a sense of longing he could not explain. Yet he also felt gratitude. He had been given a glimpse of something profound, something that transcended words or ordinary understanding. He walked back to the barn, looking over the pasture and the rising sun, feeling a new sense of connection to the land. The desert was the same, yet somehow different. There were secrets in its wind and its shadows, and he now knew that he had encountered a part of it he could never forget. In the days that followed, Ethan found himself noticing details he had never seen before. Footprints in the soft dirt that were not his own, the way animals reacted to certain sounds, and even the subtle shifts in the wind all seemed to carry messages. The memory of the two sisters lingered in his mind like a quiet song, a reminder that the world held mysteries far beyond his understanding. He could feel their presence in the land itself, in the silence of the desert and the rustling of the grass. Ethan understood, even if only instinctively, that this encounter was not a coincidence. The sisters had chosen to appear in his life for reasons he could not yet comprehend. Their visit, brief as it was, had planted a seed of change in him. He would never see the desert in the same way again. Every sunrise and every rustle of the wind now carried with it the echo of that night, a whisper of secrets, connection, and the strange, unexplainable bond between humans and the land. And so, life on the Harper Ranch continued. But Ethan himself had changed. He worked the land with a renewed awareness, looking at the ordinary world through the lens of extraordinary mystery. The memory of the two sisters, their quiet strength and their deep connection to the desert would stay with him forever, shaping the way he lived, thought, and felt. He knew that somehow they had left a permanent mark on his heart, a mark that would guide him for the rest of his days. The Harper Ranch was quiet that evening, bathed in the soft glow of the moon. Ethan Harper had finished his chores, mended the fences, and led the cattle back to the barn. The desert was calm, but there was a subtle tension in the air. The wind carried hints of an approaching storm, rustling through the dry grass and rattling the loose boards of the old barn. Ethan felt it in his bones, the restless energy of the land just before a storm, a warning that could not be ignored. He was checking the gates one last time when he noticed movement near the edge of the property. At first he thought it was the wind, perhaps a tumbleweed or a small animal scurrying through the brush. But then he saw them, two figures moving silently under the pale light of the moon. His heart skipped a beat. The sisters Ayana and Nayeli were there again. Just as suddenly as they had appeared before, they had returned to the ranch, as if drawn by some unseen force. Ethan's first instinct was caution. He had been alone on the ranch for years, and strangers rarely came this close, especially at night. But there was something different about the sisters' return. They did not move with fear or hesitation. Their steps were deliberate, yet gentle, almost as if the desert itself was welcoming them. Ethan lowered his hand from the knife at his belt. He felt a strange calmness wash over him, the same feeling he had experienced the first time he had met them. "Why are you here?" he called softly, stepping closer, but keeping a respectful distance. The sisters looked at him, their expressions serene. Ayana, the elder of the two, stepped forward slightly, her dark eyes reflecting the moonlight. "We need shelter," she said quietly. "The storm is coming." Ethan glanced at the sky. Clouds were rolling in fast, dark and heavy, blotting out the stars. The wind had grown stronger, carrying the scent of rain and dust. He nodded. Without a word, he led them to the small cabin near the barn. The sisters moved without hesitation, following him as if they had been there many times before. Inside, Ethan lit a lantern and motioned for them to sit near the fire. They did not ask for food or water. They simply settled quietly, their eyes scanning the cabin with an unusual awareness. Ethan felt their gaze upon him, but it was not judgmental or intrusive. It was as if they were reading him, understanding the way he thought and felt without a single word spoken. He studied them closely, noticing the small details he had missed before, the faint scars on their hands, the way they adjusted their posture with grace, and the calm strength that seemed to radiate from them. The storm began in earnest, wind howling and rain striking the roof with a force that made the cabin tremble. Ethan watched the sisters as they moved toward the window, their faces serene despite the storm outside. Nayeli, the younger sister, placed her hand on the glass and seemed to listen to the wind. Ethan could not explain it, but it felt as though she could hear the desert speaking, understanding its messages in a way he never could. Hours passed. The storm raged on, and the world outside became a blur of rain, wind, and shadow. Inside the cabin, the sisters remained quiet, yet their presence filled the room with a strange energy. Ethan tried to make conversation, asking them about themselves, their journey and why they had come to the ranch, but the sisters were selective with their words, revealing only fragments of their lives. They spoke of the land, the animals, and the importance of respecting both. They hinted at knowledge passed down through generations, wisdom that was not easily explained but deeply felt. Ethan listened intently, fascinated. Every word, every gesture seemed to carry a hidden meaning. He realized that the sisters were teaching him something without saying it outright. Their connection to the desert, their understanding of its creatures and its rhythms, was something he had never encountered. It was not just knowledge, it was a bond, a way of seeing and feeling that transformed everything around them. As the night wore on, the storm grew fiercer. Ethan could hear branches snapping under the wind, and the distant sound of thunder echoed through the desert canyons. He worried for the cattle, but he also felt a strange confidence. With the sisters there, he sensed that everything would be all right. Their presence seemed to bring balance, calming the chaos outside. At one point, a loud crash startled him. A tree branch had fallen near the barn, and he rushed to check on the herd. To his astonishment, the sisters followed him without hesitation. Nayeli moved with ease through the mud and rain, guiding the animals with soft gestures and calm words. Ethan watched in awe as the cattle responded instantly, moving away from danger as if they trusted the sisters' guidance more than his own. After the immediate danger passed, they returned to the cabin, soaked and quiet. Ethan offered them blankets, but they declined politely, sitting near the fire to warm themselves. The storm outside had begun to fade, replaced by a gentle drizzle and the occasional rumble of distant thunder. Inside, a quiet stillness settled over them. Ethan realized that the night had changed him in ways he could not yet understand. He could feel the sisters' influence in everything, the way he thought about the land, the animals, and even himself. They had shown him that the desert was alive in ways he had never noticed, filled with subtle signals, hidden patterns, and quiet messages waiting to be understood. Their knowledge was not just practical, it was spiritual, teaching him to listen, observe, and respect the world around him. The sisters did not speak much of themselves, but Ethan began to sense their bond. They were connected in ways deeper than family or friendship. Their movements, their gestures, and even their silence spoke volumes. He realized that the secret they carried was not something they could simply explain. It was lived, experienced, and felt, not told. By the early hours of morning, the storm had passed completely. The rain left the desert clean and vibrant, the colors of the rocks and soil deepened by the water. The air smelled of wet earth and sage, and the first light of dawn began to illuminate the horizon. Ethan stood at the cabin door, watching the sisters as they looked out toward the land. There was a calm satisfaction in their eyes, a quiet assurance that the night's events had gone as they intended. Ethan knew that this night would stay with him forever. It was not just the storm or the mysterious arrival of the sisters, but the lessons they had silently taught him. The desert was more than land. It was alive, full of wisdom and deserving of respect. And the sisters, with their quiet strength and secret knowledge, had opened his eyes to a world he had never seen. Before leaving, the sisters turned to him, their expressions unreadable but kind. Ayana nodded once, a small gesture full of meaning, as if to say, "Remember this night." Nayeli's eyes lingered on him for a moment longer, holding an unspoken connection that Ethan felt deep in his chest. And then, just as silently as they had arrived, they were gone, disappearing into the morning mist and the awakening desert. Ethan stood alone, watching the horizon. The storm had left the world changed, and so had the sisters. He felt a quiet awe, a mixture of respect and wonder. He knew that the memory of this night, of the mysterious sisters and their extraordinary connection to the land, would stay with him forever. He returned to his chores, but he worked differently now, with a sense of awareness and care he had never felt before. Every sound, every movement, and every subtle change in the desert held meaning, and he was determined to understand it, just as they had shown him. As the sun rose fully, casting golden light across the Harper Ranch, Ethan realized that life had shifted subtly. The sisters had left an invisible mark on him, a secret he could not yet explain, but would carry for the rest of his life. The desert, once familiar, now seemed alive with mysteries waiting to be discovered. And somewhere out there, among the hills and the hidden valleys, the two sisters watched, knowing that their secret had touched a man who had always believed he understood the land, yet had only now begun to truly see it. Days passed on the Harper Ranch after that stormy night, but Ethan Harper felt a shift in everything around him. The desert seemed different now, alive in ways he had never noticed before. The soft rustle of the wind through the sagebrush felt like a whisper, and the birds that usually stayed hidden were suddenly visible, moving with purpose among the trees. Even the cattle behaved in subtle ways, more attentive and calm, as if sensing something new in the air. Ethan couldn't explain it, but deep inside he knew it had something to do with the two sisters, Ayana and Nayeli. He continued his daily chores, mending fences, checking the water troughs, and leading the herd to fresh pastures. But his mind wandered. He kept thinking about the night they had arrived during the storm, the way they had moved, their calm confidence and the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from them. They had not only guided the cattle through danger, but had also taught him lessons without a single direct word. Their knowledge of the land, he realized, was far beyond anything he had learned in all his years on the ranch. One morning while walking along the ridge that overlooked the valley, Ethan noticed something unusual. Small footprints appeared in the soft, wet earth from the recent rains. At first he thought it was a deer or a coyote, but as he followed them, he realized they were not ordinary animal tracks. They were too small, too precise, almost delicate, like the footprints of children or very light-footed people. His heart raced as he recognized their rhythm, the same rhythm he had seen on the night of the storm. Ayana and Nayeli had been here again. Ethan followed the tracks carefully, keeping low and moving quietly. The footprints led to the edge of a small creek, where the water shimmered in the early sunlight. There, he saw subtle signs of their presence. A carefully arranged stack of stones, a feather resting on a branch, and the soft impressions of bare feet in the mud. He smiled softly, a mixture of amazement and curiosity. The sisters were leaving messages for him, small hints that they were near and guiding him, but without revealing too much. As he studied these signs, Ethan began to notice changes within himself. Tasks that had once seemed routine now required less effort. He instinctively knew where the cattle were grazing and how to guide them without raising their anxiety. He could sense the weather shifting before the sky showed it, noticing the wind's subtle changes and the patterns in the clouds. He realized he was becoming more observant, more connected to the land, just as the sisters had been. It was a slow, almost imperceptible change, but he felt it deeply, as if the desert itself was teaching him through their influence. Several days later, Ethan encountered a coyote caught in a trap near the edge of the ranch. Normally, he would have approached cautiously, aware of the animal's fear and possible aggression. But now he felt a calm understanding, a patience he had never known. Kneeling beside the coyote, he spoke softly, his voice steady and comforting. The animal listened, its eyes wide but unafraid. Ethan freed it carefully, watching it disappear into the brush. He felt a quiet joy, realizing that the sisters had taught him something profound. Respect and understanding could guide action just as effectively as strength or skill. That evening, Ethan returned to the barn, reflecting on these lessons. The sun had dipped behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the pasture. The air smelled faintly of rain and sagebrush, and the world seemed suspended between day and night. As he tended to the cattle, he sensed a presence again, subtle but undeniable. Ayana and Nayeli were near, though he could not see them. Their presence was like a gentle hum in the air, a reminder that they were watching, guiding, and teaching. Ethan decided to leave small gifts for them, something to show his gratitude. He placed fresh water near the creek, arranged small stones into patterns he had learned from their earlier signs, and left a simple cloth with herbs by the barn. It was his way of communicating with them, acknowledging their influence without intruding. When he returned the next morning, the gifts had been untouched, but new signs had appeared. More stones, small feathers, and impressions in the dirt that he recognized immediately. The sisters were responding, not in words but in gestures and symbols, maintaining their secretive connection with him. Over the following weeks, Ethan began noticing subtle changes in the land itself. Plants that had been struggling under the harsh desert sun were now growing stronger, small wildflowers blooming along the edges of the pasture. Even the water in the creek seemed clearer, flowing with a gentle vitality. The cattle were healthier, more energetic, and easier to manage. Ethan could not explain it, yet he felt certain it had something to do with the sisters' presence. Their connection to the land was extraordinary, almost magical, yet grounded in deep knowledge and understanding of nature. Ethan also began observing the ways they interacted with each other. Ayana and Nayeli had a bond that transcended ordinary sibling relationships. They communicated with gestures, glances, and small quiet movements, anticipating each other's thoughts and actions. Ethan realized that their secret knowledge was not just about the land, it was about connection, understanding, and harmony. Their teachings were subtle, almost invisible, yet they left a permanent mark on everything they touched. One afternoon, while repairing a section of fence near the edge of the property, Ethan noticed the sisters in the distance. They were standing quietly among the trees watching him. Their presence was serene, yet powerful. He felt an urge to approach, but something stopped him. He realized that their lessons were not meant to be forced or rushed.
They were teaching him patience, observation, and the value of learning from the world without demanding immediate understanding.
Ethan nodded to himself, understanding that true knowledge came slowly, through experience, patience, and respect. In the evenings, as he sat near the cabin fire, Ethan reflected on the changes within himself. He was no longer just a rancher working the land out of routine. He had become a student of the desert, attuned to its subtle rhythms and messages. He began keeping a small journal, noting unusual patterns, changes in the animal's behavior, and signs from the environment that he had once overlooked. Every entry reminded him of the sisters' influence, and he felt a deep sense of gratitude for the guidance they had provided, even indirectly. Ethan also started noticing that he was dreaming differently. The desert came alive in his sleep, guiding him through landscapes he had never visited, showing him hidden paths, and revealing lessons in patience, observation, and respect. Often he awoke with a clear understanding of how to handle challenges on the ranch, solutions appearing in his mind before he even encountered the problem. He realized that the sisters' teachings had seeped into his subconscious, shaping his instincts in ways he could barely comprehend. Despite all these lessons and experiences, Ethan remained curious about the sisters' true purpose. He did not pry, for he respected their boundaries, but the questions lingered in his mind. Who were they, really? Why had they chosen to share their knowledge with him? And what was the full extent of their secret? These questions were always at the edge of his thoughts, but Ethan had learned to be patient. He understood that some knowledge could not be rushed, that the most important lessons came gradually and quietly. By the end of the month, Ethan had transformed. He moved through the ranch with a calm confidence, fully aware of the land, the animals, and the subtle patterns of nature around him. He no longer saw the desert as a simple stretch of land, but as a living, breathing entity with lessons to teach and secrets to share. The sisters had left an indelible mark on him, not just in what he knew, but in who he had become. He was more observant, more patient, and more connected to the world than ever before. One morning, as the sun rose and cast a golden light across the Harper Ranch, Ethan stood at the ridge overlooking the valley. He closed his eyes and felt the wind against his face, the soft rustle of grass beneath his feet, and the heartbeat of the land around him. He knew that the sisters were near, even if he could not see them. Their presence was a quiet force, guiding him, teaching him, and leaving a permanent impression on his heart and mind. Ethan understood finally that their secret was not something to be uncovered or possessed. It was a way of seeing the world, a way of understanding the subtle connections between people, animals, and the land. The sisters had shown him a new way of being, one that required patience, respect, and attentiveness. And though he still had many questions, he felt a profound sense of peace, knowing that he had been entrusted with a glimpse of a world few had ever known. The Harper Ranch had become more than a home or a workplace. It was now a living classroom, and Ethan was a student of the land, guided by two mysterious sisters who had appeared like spirits in the desert. Every day brought new lessons, subtle messages, and reminders of that first stormy night that had changed everything. Ethan knew that his life had been forever altered, that he could never return to the man he had been before, and deep down he felt ready for whatever lessons the sisters would show him next. Ethan Harper had grown more attuned to the desert than ever before. Every morning he rose with the sun, walking the ridge to check on the cattle, observing the wind, the clouds, and the movements of small animals with a newfound awareness. His life on the Harper Ranch had changed in subtle ways, shaped by the lessons of two sisters who seemed to belong as much to the desert as the sand and rocks themselves. He often felt their presence nearby, even when he could not see them, and he had learned to trust the signs they left: a carefully placed feather, a small stack of stones, or footprints in soft dirt. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with shades of orange and pink, Ethan noticed movement near the edge of the pasture. His heart quickened, and he recognized immediately what it was. Ayana and Naeli had returned. This time they did not approach him directly. Instead, they waited, watching him quietly from the distance, their eyes reflecting the fading light. Ethan felt a mixture of anticipation and calm. He had long wondered about the nature of their secret and had hoped, in some quiet corner of his mind, that he might finally witness it. He called out to them softly. "Come closer," he said, and after a moment, the sisters stepped into the open, moving with the same graceful confidence he had come to recognize. They did not speak at first. Instead, they walked toward a small grove of trees near the creek, gesturing for him to follow. Ethan complied, curious but careful, sensing that this encounter would be unlike any other. When they reached the grove, Ayana stopped and looked at him with a steady gaze. "Tonight we will show you," she said quietly. "But you must watch, listen, and feel. Words will not tell it all." Ethan nodded, understanding that this was a moment of learning, a rare glimpse into something deeper than ordinary knowledge. Naeli moved to a clearing in the center of the grove and began arranging stones in a circular pattern, while Ayana collected dry herbs and small branches, placing them in precise, careful order. Every motion seemed deliberate, purposeful, as though each step carried meaning beyond the visible. Ethan watched closely, noticing the patterns forming on the ground. The circle of stones seemed to represent the natural flow of life: plants, animals, water, wind, and earth, all connected in a delicate balance. The herbs and branches, carefully placed, seemed to resonate with the rhythm of the desert, as if channeling energy from the land itself. Ethan felt a quiet awe wash over him. This was not magic, nor was it superstition. It was knowledge, understanding, and reverence for life expressed in a way he had never seen. As the sisters worked, Ethan felt a connection forming with the desert that went deeper than anything he had experienced before. He could sense the subtle vibrations of the earth beneath his feet, the movement of air and water, and even the quiet whispers of the trees. The sisters' presence seemed to amplify these sensations, guiding him to notice details he had once overlooked. He realized that their secret was not something they could simply explain. It had to be experienced, felt, and absorbed. After a while, Ayana began to speak, her voice calm and measured. "Our ancestors have lived with this land for generations," she explained. "They understood the desert, the rivers, and the creatures that roam it. They learned to listen, to respect, and to protect. This knowledge is passed quietly, not in words but in practice, in attention, and in care." Ethan nodded, absorbing every word. He felt privileged to witness this, understanding that the sisters were sharing a glimpse of a world few people ever saw. Nayeli then guided him to a nearby stream, where the water flowed clear and cool. She motioned for him to observe the movements of the fish and the insects that skimmed the surface. Ethan noticed patterns he had never seen before, the way fish reacted to changes in the current, how insects signaled shifts in weather, and how the water itself seemed to carry messages if one watched carefully. It was a lesson in observation, patience, and understanding that transcended ordinary ranch work. As night fell, the sisters arranged small fires around the grove, not to burn, but to illuminate the patterns they had created with the stones and herbs. The flickering light cast shadows that seemed to dance, revealing connections between all living things in the desert. Ethan felt as though he could see the invisible threads that linked animals, plants, water, and air, a web of life that required respect and careful stewardship. The sisters watched him closely, guiding him with small gestures and glances, allowing him to feel the rhythm of the desert without imposing words. By midnight, Ethan had begun to understand. The sisters' secret was not a hidden treasure or mystical power. It was the knowledge of balance, of harmony between humans and nature, and the awareness that every action had consequences. He realized that his own life, his ranch, and the animals he cared for were all part of this intricate system. The sisters had shown him a path to understanding it, not by telling him, but by teaching him to observe, feel, and connect. At one point, Ethan noticed a small doe watching from the edge of the grove. Its eyes reflected the firelight, and it did not seem afraid. Ayana gestured for him to remain still, and he watched as the deer moved gracefully through the clearing. Unafraid and unharmed, he understood then that the sisters had a deep bond with every creature in the desert. Their knowledge was not about control, but about coexistence, respect, and care. Every movement, every gesture, every choice they made honored life in a way Ethan had never considered. The night grew quieter, the fires dimming, and the air cool and still. The sisters gathered the stones and herbs, carefully returning them to the earth and the patterns they had arranged. "Remember what you have seen," Ayana said softly. "This is not just knowledge, it is responsibility. Life is fragile, and understanding it requires care, patience, and respect." He knew he had been entrusted with something profound, something that could guide his actions and thoughts for the rest of his life. Before leaving, the sisters stood silently with him, their eyes holding an unspoken message. Ethan understood that he had been given a gift, the gift of seeing the desert and its inhabitants in a new light. He had been changed, not only by what he had learned, but by the experience of witnessing it directly. The sisters' presence, their knowledge, and their quiet guidance had left a permanent mark on him, shaping his understanding of the land and his place within it. As they walked back toward the shadows of the trees, Ethan felt a sense of awe and gratitude. He realized that the sisters' secret was not theirs alone to keep. It was something he had to carry forward in his actions, decisions, and care for the ranch. Their teachings had transformed him, revealing a deeper layer of life in the desert and in himself. Every sunrise, every gust of wind, and every movement of the animals now held meaning he could recognize and honor. When Ethan returned to the cabin, he sat quietly by the fire, reflecting on the night's lessons. The desert outside was calm, the stars bright and clear above. He knew that the sisters' teachings would guide him for years to come, shaping not only his ranch but his very way of thinking and living. He felt a profound connection to the land, the animals, and the natural rhythms that governed life around him. The Harper Ranch was no longer just his home. It was a living classroom, a place where every detail mattered and every action had significance. In the days that followed, Ethan noticed even more changes. The plants grew healthier, the water seemed purer, and the cattle moved with a calm, almost intuitive understanding. He began to anticipate changes in the weather, understand the habits of the wildlife, and work in harmony with the desert rather than simply managing it. He realized that the sisters had left a mark on him far deeper than he had ever imagined. Their secret knowledge was now intertwined with his daily life, guiding him in ways he could feel but not always explain. Ethan also began to notice small signs that the sisters were still near, though they did not approach him directly. Feathers appeared in unexpected places, stones arranged in patterns he had seen during the night in the grove, and the soft impression of bare feet in the earth. These signs were subtle, almost invisible to anyone else, but Ethan recognized them instantly. They were reminders, guidance, and encouragement, showing him that the sisters' presence, though fleeting, continued to influence him in the land he cared for.
By the end of the week, Ethan understood the true lesson of the night. Knowledge, without respect and observation, was meaningless.
The sisters had shown him not only how to understand the land, but also how to live in harmony with it. They had opened his eyes to the delicate balance of life, the unseen connections between all living things, and the responsibility that came with understanding. He knew that he could never go back to seeing the world as he once had. The desert had revealed its secrets to him, and he had been entrusted with them, forever changed by what he had witnessed. Ethan Harper looked out over the Harper Ranch one evening, the sun setting in streaks of gold and crimson. The wind carried the faint scent of sagebrush and wet earth. He felt the quiet presence of Ayanna and Nayeli, even though they were not visible. He understood that their secret was more than knowledge. It was wisdom, care, and harmony with life itself. And in that moment, Ethan knew that his life, his ranch, and his heart had been forever marked by the lessons of the two sisters, a mark that would guide him, quietly and powerfully, for the rest of his days. The Harper Ranch had never seemed more alive to Ethan Harper. Months had passed since the sisters, Ayanna and Nayeli, had returned that night of the storm, yet their presence was still felt everywhere. Every movement of the cattle, every rustle of the grass, and every whisper of the wind reminded him of the lessons they had taught him. The desert was no longer just a place he worked in. It was a living, breathing partner, a teacher that revealed its secrets to those who were willing to listen. Ethan had become more patient, more observant, and more connected to the land than he had ever been in all his years as a rancher. One morning Ethan rose before dawn, the sky painted with soft shades of pink and gold. The air was crisp and cool, carrying the faint scent of sage and wildflowers. As he walked along the ridge to check on the cattle, he noticed the familiar signs. The subtle movement of animals, the arrangement of stones near the creek, and the small feathers that always seemed to appear after a visit from the sisters. He smiled quietly to himself. Even without seeing them, he knew they were near, guiding him, reminding him of their teachings. That day, as he worked on mending a section of the fence, Ethan noticed something unusual. Two shadows appeared near the edge of the pasture. His heart quickened. It was them. Ayanna and Nayeli had returned, not out of urgency this time, but as if to offer a final lesson, a parting gift for the knowledge they had shared. Their movements were calm and deliberate, filled with the quiet confidence that had always marked their presence. Ethan felt a mixture of excitement and reverence. He approached them slowly, careful not to break the delicate harmony that seemed to surround them. The sisters did not speak immediately. They walked with him to a clearing he had often visited during his reflections, a place where the sunlight danced through the trees and the creek ran clear and calm. There they paused and gestured for him to sit. Ethan obeyed, sensing that this moment would be meaningful in a way he could not yet understand. The air was still, the desert holding its breath, as if waiting for the final chapter of their time together. Ayanna began to speak softly. "Ethan," she said, "you have learned well. You have watched, listened, and felt the land in ways few ever can. But the greatest lesson is not about knowledge. It is about responsibility. Every action has meaning, and every choice affects the balance of life around you. Ethan nodded, feeling the weight and truth of her words. He had come to understand this instinctively, but hearing it spoken aloud by the sisters gave it an almost sacred significance. Nayeli added, "We have shown you what we can, but the rest is yours to discover. The land will teach you if you are patient. The animals will guide you if you observe. And the wind will speak to you if you listen." Her eyes held a gentle intensity, and Ethan felt the depth of their trust in him. They had given him a gift beyond measure, the knowledge of life in harmony with nature, a gift that could shape his entire existence. Ethan realized that the sisters were preparing to leave for the last time. He felt a pang of sadness, knowing that this connection, as extraordinary as it had been, could not remain visible forever. Yet he also understood that the lessons they had imparted were permanent. They had changed him at a core level, shaping not only his work on the ranch but his understanding of life itself. Every sunrise, every gust of wind, and every subtle movement of the animals would carry their teachings forward. Before they departed, the sisters guided him through one final exercise. They showed him how to read the signs in the earth, the tracks of animals, the patterns of plants, and the subtle shifts in water and wind. Ethan practiced under their watchful eyes, learning to interpret what he had once overlooked. By the time the sun reached its peak, he was able to predict the movements of the cattle, sense the approach of weather changes, and even anticipate the needs of the land itself. It was the culmination of everything they had taught him, a mastery of observation, patience, and understanding that could guide him forever. As the afternoon sun began to descend, painting the sky in golden hues, the sisters finally stepped back, their expressions calm and serene. Ayana placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, a gesture filled with warmth and reassurance. "Remember," she said softly, "the land is always speaking. You have the gift to listen. Use it wisely." Nayeli nodded, her eyes reflecting the sunlight, and added, "We will always be near, in spirit if not in sight. You are ready now." With that, the sisters began walking toward the distant hills, their forms becoming silhouettes against the setting sun. Ethan watched in silence, a profound sense of gratitude filling him. He felt a mixture of loss and hope, loss for their departure, but hope in the knowledge that their teachings were now part of him. The desert, once a place of routine labor, had become a living, breathing world of lessons, and he was now fully awake to its rhythms. After they disappeared from view, Ethan returned to the ranch with a renewed sense of purpose. The land looked different to him now. Every tree, rock, and stream seemed alive with meaning. He walked slowly, observing the cattle, checking the fences, and noting the signs that nature provided. He realized that the sisters' influence would continue in small, subtle ways. Feathers, stones, and footprints would appear as reminders, guiding him and affirming the bond they had created. Over the next days and weeks, Ethan noticed extraordinary changes. The cattle were healthier and calmer. The plants grew stronger, more vibrant after the rains, and the water in the creek was clearer and more abundant. Even the weather seemed to follow patterns that he could now understand intuitively. Ethan knew this was not coincidence. The land responded to care, observation, and respect, and he had learned the importance of balance in every aspect of life. Ethan also began sharing his new understanding in quiet ways. He taught his neighbors gently and respectfully about the importance of observing the land and living in harmony with it. He helped them see patterns in the desert, teaching patience and careful attention without revealing the sisters' secrets directly. He wanted others to benefit from the lessons he had learned, to understand that true knowledge came from experience, observation, and connection rather than force or control. Even in his private moments, Ethan felt the sisters' presence. At dawn, he would sense them in the wind that carried the scent of sage. In the evenings, he would feel them in the soft rustle of the grass. In his dreams, they appeared as guiding spirits, reminding him to stay aware, patient, and respectful. The desert had become a teacher, and the sisters' influence was woven into the very fabric of his life. One night, as Ethan sat by the fire in the cabin, reflecting on all that had happened, he realized how much he had changed. He was no longer just a rancher managing land and animals. He was a steward of the desert, attuned to its rhythms, and connected to life in ways he had never imagined. The sisters had given him more than knowledge. They had given him insight, patience, understanding, and a deep appreciation for the balance of life. Ethan stood outside, the stars stretching across the desert sky. The cool air brushed his face, carrying the scent of earth and distant rain. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, feeling the heartbeat of the land beneath his feet. He remembered the sisters' words, their gentle guidance, and the lessons they had imparted without ever forcing them upon him. He understood now that the desert, the animals, and the earth itself were part of a larger web, one that required respect, care, and attention. From that night forward, every day was a continuation of what the sisters had taught him. Ethan moved through the Harper Ranch with purpose and mindfulness. He observed the smallest details, noticed the patterns in the sky, and understood the signs that the desert offered. His connection with the animals grew deeper, and he treated every living being with care and respect. The sisters had left, but their influence remained, guiding him quietly, like a shadow that always accompanied him. Years passed, and Ethan Harper never forgot that transformative time. The lessons of the sisters shaped the way he lived, worked, and thought. He often told stories to his children and grandchildren, not of magic, but of awareness, patience, and respect for the land and all living creatures. The Harper Ranch thrived like never before, and the desert, once simply a place to work, became a source of wisdom, inspiration, and life. Even in his later years, Ethan would sometimes catch a glimpse of movement at the edge of the pasture, a shadow in the trees, or the glint of sunlight on a feather. And though he rarely spoke of it aloud, he knew that Ayanna and Nayeli were still near, guardians of the land and guides of the spirit. The night of the storm, their return, and the lessons they had imparted remained etched in his heart forever, shaping the man he had become and the legacy he would leave behind. Ethan Harper often reflected on that night and the months that followed. He realized that some encounters in life, though brief, could leave permanent marks. The sisters had shown him that life was full of subtle signs, lessons, and connections, and that the greatest knowledge was often learned quietly, through observation, patience, and care. They had forever changed his life, his understanding of the desert, and his approach to the world around him. And so, the Harper Ranch continued to flourish under Ethan's stewardship, guided by the lessons of the two sisters who had appeared for just a short while but had left a lasting imprint on his heart. The desert remained alive with their presence, a living reminder of the night that had transformed him and the secret that would always guide his life. Ethan knew without doubt that he had been marked by their wisdom and grace, forever carrying the gift they had shared, in the land, in the animals, and within himself.